It's not mine. Wind blows it, that's all. I didn't put anything on your lawn.
Don't you lie to me.
I saw your bag split open right there. Hey!
August 15th, 2019. Deputy Margaret Williams had been responding to suspicious person calls for 23 years. She'd never expected to find herself staring at the woman who killed her son. Not literally. Rebecca Patterson had never laid a hand on Marcus. But her testimony put him in Millbrook State Penitentiary at 17. Her lies about what she saw that night in 2004. Her voice saying, "I'm absolutely certain it was him," while pointing at a boy who was home studying for his SATs. Marcus lasted 8 months inside before he found a bedsheet and a ceiling beam. Rebecca stood on her manicured lawn now, cell phone pressed to her ear, demanding police remove the threatening black woman from her neighborhood. She didn't recognize the badge, didn't see the name Williams stitched on the uniform, didn't realize she was calling for backup against the mother of the boy she'd murdered with her words. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maggie's radio crackled to life, dispatcher's voice cutting through the humid Georgia air. "Unit 47, what's your status on the Willowbrook call?" She couldn't answer. Not yet. Her throat had closed around words that tasted like copper and old grief. Rebecca Patterson stood 15 feet away, still talking into her phone, gesturing wildly at Maggie with her free hand. The woman's voice carried across the pristine lawn, high-pitched, indignant, entitled. "Yes, she's still here, just standing there, staring at me. It's intimidating. I don't feel safe in my own neighborhood." Safe. The word hit Maggie like a physical blow. Rebecca Patterson talking about safety while wearing designer athleisure, worth more than most people's monthly rent, while standing in front of a house that could shelter 3 families. Safe when she'd stolen safety from a 17-year-old boy who'd never hurt anyone in his life. Maggie's hand drifted toward her weapon, muscle memory responding to a threat her conscious mind hadn't fully processed. She caught herself, forced her arm back to her side. 23 years of training warring against 15 years of rage. The subdivision spread around them like a monument to quiet wealth. Willowbrook Estates, where the lawns stayed green through drought and the security cameras watched every corner. Where people like Rebecca Patterson moved when they wanted distance from people like Maggie's family used to be. "Ma'am," Maggie called out, surprised her voice worked at all. "I'm Deputy Williams, Millbrook County Sheriff's Department. I received a call about suspicious activity." Rebecca lowered her phone but kept it ready, like a weapon. "Yes, I called. There was a woman walking through the neighborhood earlier, looking into cars. When I came out to check, she got aggressive. Lies came so easily to this woman." Maggie wondered if Rebecca even recognized truth anymore, or if it had been buried so deep under years of convenient fiction that it couldn't surface. "Can you describe this person?" Black woman, maybe 40, 50, wearing jeans and a dark hoodie. She was definitely casing the area. Rebecca's eyes narrowed as she studied Maggie's face. "You know, you look—" "Unit 47, respond please." The radio cut through whatever recognition might have been dawning. Maggie keyed the mic. "Unit 47 responding, still on scene, gathering information." She needed to leave. Should have left the moment she recognized Rebecca's face. Protocol demanded she request another unit, cite conflict of interest, remove herself from the situation. But her feet stayed planted on the sidewalk, where Marcus used to ride his bike when they'd lived 3 neighborhoods over. In the apartments Rebecca's people called those places. "I need to see some identification," Maggie said, pulling out her notepad. "Professional, by the book." Even though every cell in her body screamed for something else entirely, Rebecca hesitated. "I don't think I have to—" "For the police report, ma'am. Standard procedure." The woman reluctantly dug through her designer purse, produced a Georgia driver's license. Rebecca Marie Patterson, age 52, the same address they stood in front of now. Maggie wrote it down with steady hands, though the pen felt slick with sweat. Up close, she could see the years on Rebecca's face. 15 summers of pool parties and country club brunches, while Marcus rotted in the ground. Laugh lines earned, while Maggie's marriage crumbled, and her husband drank himself into his own early grave, 2 years after they buried their son. "Mrs. Patterson," Maggie said carefully, "have we met before?" Something flickered in Rebecca's expression. Uncertainty, the edges of memory trying to surface. "I don't think so, though." Rebecca tilted her head, studying Maggie's features. "You do seem familiar. Do you live around here? No, ma'am. Maggie's voice stayed level through sheer force of will. I patrol this area, though, have for several years. A siren wailed in the distance, growing closer. Rebecca had called for backup before Maggie arrived, probably demanded multiple units because she felt threatened. Soon this quiet street would be full of Maggie's colleagues, asking questions, taking statements, treating this like any other suspicious person call. The siren grew louder. Maggie had maybe 2 minutes before this became something she couldn't control. 2 minutes to decide what 23 years of service meant against 15 years of grief. Rebecca was still staring at her, pieces clicking together in her mind. Williams, she said slowly. Deputy Williams. That name. Maggie met her eyes directly for the first time since arriving on scene. Watched understanding begin to dawn in Rebecca's face like a slow sunrise. Watched the color drain from her cheeks as she remembered a courtroom, a grieving mother in the gallery, a name she'd probably tried to forget. The siren turned onto their street. You remember now, Maggie said quietly. Rebecca's phone slipped from her fingers, hit the perfect grass with a small thud. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The patrol car rounded the corner, emergency lights painting the expensive houses in red and blue. The patrol car's brakes hissed against asphalt as it pulled to the curb. Deputy Jake Morrison climbed out, 26 years old, with the eager posture of someone still proving himself. Maggie had trained him 2 years ago, watched him fumble his first domestic call and grow into someone she trusted to have her back. Now she prayed he wouldn't ask the wrong questions. Deputy Williams. Jake's voice carried relief. He'd probably expected chaos, given Rebecca's hysterical call for backup. Instead, he found his field training officer standing calmly beside a woman who looked like she'd seen a ghost. What's the situation? Suspicious person call, Maggie replied, each word carefully measured. Mrs. Patterson reported someone casing vehicles in the neighborhood. I was gathering details. Rebecca's breathing had turned shallow, rapid. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled as she bent to retrieve her phone from the grass. The device's screen had cracked against something hard, probably the decorative stone border around her flower bed. Ma'am? Jake stepped toward Rebecca, concern creasing his young face. Are you all right? You look... I'm fine. The words came out strangled. Rebecca straightened, tried to compose herself, but her eyes never left Maggie's face. Just the heat. It's been a long morning. Fiend years, Maggie thought. Years since you looked at me like this. The last time had been in the courthouse hallway after the verdict. Rebecca had emerged from the bathroom, spotted Maggie sitting alone on a bench while David spoke with Marcus's lawyer about the appeal they couldn't afford. For just a moment, their eyes had met. Rebecca's face had shown something, guilt maybe, or recognition of what her testimony had cost. But she'd looked away quickly, hurried past without a word. Why don't you walk me through what happened? Jake said, pulling out his own notepad. Start from the beginning. Rebecca glanced between the two deputies, calculation replacing shock in her expression. She was remembering who she was, what power she held in a neighborhood like this, what story would serve her best. I was doing my morning routine, she began, voice gaining strength. Checking the mail, watering my plants. That's when I noticed someone suspicious walking between the houses, looking into car windows, trying door handles. More lies. They spilled from Rebecca's lips like water from a broken dam, each one precisely crafted to paint herself as victim, the unnamed woman as threat. Maggie listened and took notes, her handwriting steady despite the tremor in her chest. Jake nodded along, writing dutifully. He had no reason to doubt a well-dressed woman in an expensive neighborhood. This was how the system worked, had always worked. People like Rebecca spoke, and people like Jake listened, and the truth got buried under assumptions about who belonged where. Did you get a good look at this person? Jake asked. Close enough. Rebecca's confidence was returning. Middle-aged black woman, probably from one of those apartment complexes on Riverside. You know how they wander over here sometimes, looking for opportunities. The casual racism hung in the air like smoke. Jake's expression tightened slightly. He was better than that, at least, but he wrote it down. Maggie thought about Marcus at 17, walking home from his job at the auto parts store. How he'd cut through this neighborhood because the bus route was longer. How Rebecca had seen him and made assumptions. How those assumptions had become testimony that put him in a cell with men who killed him for sport. Any cameras catch this activity? Maggie asked, surprised by her own steady tone. Well, No, it happened very quickly. Rebecca's story was already showing cracks. By the time I thought to look at the security footage, she was gone. But you called immediately? Yes, of course. Right after I confronted her, and she became aggressive? A pause. Rebecca's eyes darted to Jake, then back to Maggie. She raised her voice, used profanity, made threatening gestures. The way Marcus raised his voice when you accused him of stealing Mrs. Henderson's purse? Maggie wanted to ask. The way he gestured when he tried to explain he was just walking home? I'll canvass the area, Jake offered. Check with neighbors, see if anyone else witnessed this incident. That won't be necessary, Rebecca said quickly. I just wanted it on record, for insurance purposes, in case something goes missing later. Maggie closed her notepad with a soft snap. Mrs. Patterson, you mentioned I looked familiar earlier. Have you given any more thought to where we might have met? The question hung between them like a blade. Rebecca's composure cracked again, just slightly. She touched her throat, a nervous gesture Maggie remembered from the courtroom. No, I'm sure I was mistaken. But they both knew she wasn't mistaken. They both knew exactly where they'd met before, in a room where justice was supposed to live, but where lies had triumphed instead. Jake looked between them, sensing undercurrents he couldn't identify. Everything okay here? Jake's question carried the weight of genuine concern now. He'd worked with Maggie long enough to read her moods, and something in the air between the two women set off his instincts. Maggie was about to deflect, to manufacture some excuse that would get them both away from this powder keg, when Rebecca's phone buzzed. The cracked screen lit up with an incoming call, and the name that appeared made Rebecca's face go white. Channel 7 News. I'm not... Rebecca stared at the phone like it might bite her. I don't understand why they would... But Maggie understood. She understood with the sudden, crushing clarity of puzzle pieces falling into place. The news van she'd passed on the way into Willowbrook, the reporter with the microphone standing in front of the Millbrook County Courthouse. Today's date circled in red on the calendar she kept in her patrol car. 15 years. Marcus would have been 32 today. The phone stopped buzzing, then immediately started again. Same name, Channel 7 News. Mrs. Patterson, Jake said carefully. Is there something else going on here? Something we should know about? Rebecca's hands shook as she declined the call. I don't know what this is about. I haven't spoken to any reporters. But Maggie knew. Someone had been digging into old cases, following threads that people like Rebecca thought had been buried with time and careful forgetting. The kind of investigative piece that played well during slow news cycles. Wrongful convictions, racial bias, justice denied. Another phone started ringing. This time it was Maggie's personal cell, the number she kept private. She glanced at the screen and her blood turned to ice. Tom Bradley, Channel 7. She'd given him an interview 2 years ago for a piece on women in law enforcement. He'd been respectful, professional, had kept her number. Deputy Williams? Jake was studying her now, the way he'd been trained to read situations that weren't adding up. Do you need to take that? Maggie let it go to voicemail, but already she could imagine what Tom Bradley wanted to ask her, what anniversary he was marking, what story he was piecing together about a 17-year-old boy named Marcus Williams who died in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message. She looked down reflexively, and Maggie caught a glimpse of the preview text. Mrs. Patterson, this is Tom Bradley from Channel 7. I'm working on a story about the Marcus Williams case. I'd like to ask you... The phone slipped from Rebecca's fingers again, this time staying where it fell. Jesus Christ, Rebecca whispered. After all these years, why now? The words escaped before she could stop them, and Jake's head snapped up. He looked between the two women with new understanding dawning in his expression. Not the full picture, not yet, but enough to know this wasn't about any suspicious person call. What case? Jake asked quietly. What happened 15 years ago? Maggie's radio crackled. Unit 47. Are you available for a 10 to 21? Channel 7 News is requesting contact with Deputy Williams regarding an ongoing investigation. Phone contact. They wanted her to call them back. On the record. The moment stretched like a wire about to snap. Rebecca staring at her fallen phone, Jake looking between them with growing suspicion, and Maggie standing in the center of it all with 15 years of careful compartmentalization crumbling around her feet. She could walk away. Should walk away. Tell Jake to handle the paperwork, get in her patrol car, and drive until her shift ended and someone else's began. Let the reporters chase their story without her. Let Rebecca Patterson face whatever consequences were coming without Maggie's involvement. But Marcus's ghost stood between them on the pristine lawn, 17 forever, asking why his mother had spent 15 years upholding a system that had failed him so completely. "My son," Maggie said quietly, the words tasting like blood and old tears. "Marcus Williams." Mrs. Patterson was a witness in his case. Jake went very still. Every deputy in the county knew about Marcus Williams, even the young ones. It was the kind of story that got passed down through shift changes and training sessions. A cautionary tale about rushing to judgment, about the cost of getting it wrong. Rebecca made a sound like a wounded animal. "I told the truth. I told them what I saw." "You told them what you thought you saw," Maggie corrected, her voice steady as granite. "You told them what fit the story you wanted to believe." The radio crackled again, more calls coming in. The news cycle beginning to spin, 15-year-old wounds being torn open for public consumption. There would be no going back to her quiet life after this moment. No more pretending the past was buried. No more serving the same system that had killed her son while the woman who'd helped destroy him lived untouched in houses built on foundations of casual cruelty. The reckoning Rebecca Patterson had spent 15 years avoiding was finally here. The silence stretched between them like a chasm that had been 15 years in the making. Jake's young face cycled through confusion, recognition, and something approaching horror as the full weight of what he'd stumbled into began to settle. "Deputy Williams," he said carefully, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we should—" "No." Maggie's word cut through the suggestion before it could fully form. She could see Jake's instinct to protect her, to find some procedural escape hatch that would get them both away from this minefield. But there was nowhere to run now. The past had finally caught up to the present on this perfect suburban street, and all the protocols in the world couldn't put it back in its box. Rebecca's phone buzzed again from where it lay in the grass. Another text preview lit up the cracked screen. "Mrs. Patterson, we have court documents showing inconsistencies in your original testimony." Rebecca lunged for the phone, snatching it up and clutching it against her chest, as if she could smother the words before they escaped. But her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it again. "This isn't fair," she said, her voice breaking on the words. "It was 15 years ago. I was just trying to help. I was being a good citizen." Jake took a step back, creating distance from whatever was about to explode between these two women. His training was failing him. Nowhere in the academy had they covered what to do when your field training officer came face to face with someone from her dead son's case. Maggie watched Rebecca's careful composure completely disintegrate. The woman who had spoken with such calm certainty on the witness stand, who had looked a jury in the eye and sworn she'd seen Marcus Williams grabbing for Martha Henderson's purse, was now reduced to this, a trembling figure in designer workout clothes, clutching a broken phone like a lifeline. "A good citizen," Maggie repeated slowly, tasting each word. "Is that what you called it when you told them you were absolutely certain it was him?" "I was certain. I saw—" "You saw a black teenager walking through your neighborhood and made assumptions." The words came out flat, factual, no heat in them, which somehow made them more devastating than shouting would have been. "You saw what you expected to see." Rebecca's breath came in short, sharp bursts. "The police said he had a record. They said he'd been in trouble before." "After," Maggie corrected. "They told you that after you'd already identified him, after you'd already decided he was guilty." Jake's radio crackled to life. "Unit 23, respond to Channel 7 news van requesting access to Willowbrook subdivision. Security gate has them stopped at the entrance." The net was closing. Soon this quiet street would be crawling with reporters, cameras, questions that had been buried for 15 years clawing their way back to the surface. And somewhere in the mix, Rebecca Patterson's carefully constructed life would be dissected for public consumption. Maggie should have felt satisfaction at the thought, should have enjoyed watching the woman who destroyed her family finally face consequences. But all she felt was tired, a bone-deep exhaustion that 23 years of wearing the badge hadn't prepared her for. "They're coming here," Rebecca whispered, staring toward the subdivision entrance like she could see through the trees to the news van beyond. "They're actually coming here." "Yeah," Maggie said quietly. "They are. You have to stop them." Rebecca's desperation was palpable now, her perfectly composed mask completely gone. "You're a police officer. You have authority. You can make them leave." The irony wasn't lost on Maggie. Rebecca Patterson, who had called the police to remove an unwanted presence from her neighborhood, now begging those same police to protect her from the consequences of her own actions. Jake cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Deputy Williams, what are your orders here?" It was a fair question. He was looking to her for guidance in a situation that had no precedent, no clear chain of command. How do you handle it when the victim's mother wears the same badge as the officers who failed to find justice 15 years ago? Before Maggie could answer, her personal phone rang again. Tom Bradley, persistent as any good reporter should be. This time, she answered. "Deputy Williams." "Maggie, it's Tom Bradley from Channel 7. I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm working on a follow-up piece about the Marcus Williams case. I know this is difficult, but I was hoping you might be willing to share your perspective." Through the phone, she could hear the sound of a vehicle engine getting closer, the news van making its way through Willowbrook's winding streets. Rebecca was watching her with the desperate intensity of a drowning person spotting a life preserver just out of reach. "Mr. Bradley," Maggie said, her voice carrying across the perfect lawn, "I'm actually on a call in Willowbrook Estates right now. I'll have to get back to you." She hung up and looked at Rebecca Patterson, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since arriving on scene. The reckoning was here, and there was nowhere left to hide. The silence that followed stretched like a taut wire, vibrating with 15 years of buried truth. Rebecca's face had gone ashen, the careful color coordination of her workout ensemble now seeming garish against her pallor. She understood what Maggie had just done, revealed their location to the very reporter hunting her down. "You told him where we are," Rebecca breathed, the accusation hanging between them like smoke. "I told him the truth," Maggie replied. "Something you might want to try." Jake's radio crackled again. "All units, be advised, Channel 7 news van has cleared Willowbrook security. ETA to Maple Grove Lane, 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Rebecca's eyes darted toward the street, then back to Maggie, calculation and panic warring across her features. "There has to be something we can work out, some way to handle this quietly." The word quietly hit Maggie like a physical blow. Marcus had died quietly. David had killed himself quietly. She had grieved quietly for 15 years, wearing her badge and serving a system that had failed her family, keeping her pain buried so deep she sometimes forgot it was there. "Quietly," Maggie repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like how Marcus died quietly in his cell? Like how my husband quietly swallowed a bottle of pills because he couldn't live with what happened to our son." Jake made a sound, sharp intake of breath, recognition of pain too vast for his 24 years to fully comprehend. He'd heard about Deputy Williams' tragedy in whispered conversations at shift change, but hearing it laid bare like this was different, raw, immediate. Rebecca's hands flew to her mouth. "I didn't know about your husband. I never heard." "Why would you?" Maggie's tone remained conversational, which made the words cut deeper. "You got to go back to your life, your perfect house, your perfect neighborhood. You never had to think about what your testimony cost." The sound of an approaching vehicle echoed through the subdivision's quiet streets. Rebecca spun toward the noise like a hunted animal, her perfectly styled hair coming loose from its band. "Please," she whispered, turning back to Maggie. "You have children. You understand. I have grandchildren now. A reputation. This will destroy everything I've built." "Everything you built," Maggie said slowly, "was constructed on my son's grave." Jake stepped forward, his young face creased with an emotion he couldn't name. "Ma'am, maybe you should go inside. Let us handle the media." But Rebecca shook her head frantically. "You don't understand. Once they start digging, once this becomes news again..." Her voice broke. "There are things, other things." The admission hung in the air like a confession. Maggie felt something cold settle in her chest. "Other things?" Rebecca's phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed a local number she didn't recognize. She declined it immediately, but Maggie had seen the fear in her eyes when she looked at the screen. "Mrs. Patterson," Maggie said, her deputy's instincts taking over despite everything else. "What other thing?" The news van rounded the corner, its white bulk looking obscenely out of place among the manicured lawns and luxury SUVs. Behind it followed a second vehicle, another news station, drawn by whatever story was breaking. Rebecca watched them approach with the expression of someone watching her own execution. "I wasn't the only witness," she whispered. "There was someone else who saw, who could have testified." Maggie's blood turned to ice. "What are you saying?" "Mrs. Chen, from 3 houses down. She was gardening when it happened. She saw the whole thing. Rebecca's words came faster now, tumbling over each other in their rush to escape. She saw the real thief, a white man in his 20s. She told the police, but they said they already had their suspect. They told her not to worry about it. The world tilted sideways. Maggie grabbed the porch railing for support, her knees threatening to give out. You knew there was another witness? I heard her talking to the detective. I was waiting to give my statement, and I heard her through the door. She was upset, saying they had the wrong person, but Detective Morrison told her the case was solid, said my testimony was enough. Jake made a strangled sound. Detective Morrison had been his grandfather, a legend in the department, the man who'd inspired Jake to become a cop. The news van doors slammed shut, footsteps on asphalt getting closer. In seconds, this quiet suburban street would become ground zero for a story that would tear through the county like wildfire. 15 years, Maggie said, her voice barely functional. 15 years, you knew there was someone who could have saved him. Rebecca was crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. I was scared. I thought I was helping. You thought it was easier to let a black boy take the fall than admit you might be wrong. The footsteps were at the end of the driveway now, questions being shouted, cameras being readied. The reckoning Rebecca Patterson had avoided for 15 years was about to begin, and it was going to be anything but quiet. The reporters' voices carried across the perfect lawn like harbingers of judgment, but Maggie barely heard them. The world had narrowed to a single devastating truth. Detective Morrison hadn't just failed to investigate properly, he had actively suppressed evidence. The man whose picture hung in the department's Hall of Honor, whose methods were still taught to new recruits, whose legacy Jake Morrison carried like a sacred trust. Your grandfather, Maggie said, her voice hollow as a tomb. Jake's face crumpled as understanding hit him with the force of a physical blow. No. The word escaped him like air from punctured lungs. Granddad he wouldn't have. But even as he said it, Maggie could see the terrible mathematics playing out behind his eyes. The stories Jake had told her during long patrol shifts about his grandfather's legendary case closure rate. The way Detective Morrison had always seemed to know exactly where to look, exactly who to arrest. The departmental rumors that he had an almost supernatural ability to spot guilt. Rebecca wiped mascara from her cheeks with shaking hands. He said the Chen woman was confused. That trauma makes witnesses unreliable. He said my testimony was clearer, more definitive. Because you gave him what he wanted, Maggie said. The pieces were falling into place now, 15 years of questions finally finding their answers. A scared white woman pointing at a black teenager. Clean, simple, case closed. Jake staggered backward, his hand instinctively reaching for his radio, as if he could call his grandfather back from the dead to explain himself. He trained half the department. God, how many others were there? The question hung between them like toxic smoke. How many other Marcus Williamses had there been? How many other families destroyed by Detective Morrison's need for neat, expedient justice? Deputy Williams! Tom Bradley's voice cut through their revelation. The reporter was at the edge of the lawn now, microphone extended, camera rolling. Can you comment on new evidence in your son's case? Rebecca made a sound like a wounded animal. I can't do this. I won't. You already did it, Maggie cut her off, her deputy's training warring with 15 years of buried rage. She could see Jake struggling with the same conflict, sworn to protect and serve, facing evidence that the system they'd pledged their lives to was built on lies. Tom Bradley stepped closer, his cameraman following. Mrs. Patterson, sources indicate you may have withheld information during the original investigation. Would you care to respond? Get away from me. Rebecca's voice cracked like a whip across the manicured lawn. I have nothing to say to you people, but the cameras kept rolling and more reporters were arriving. Channel 12, the county paper. Someone with a smartphone live streaming to Facebook. Rebecca's perfect world was dissolving in real time, broadcast to anyone who cared to watch. Maggie's voice was steady now, deadly calm. I need you to call Detective Rivera. Tell her we have new information about an old case. Tell her it involves Detective Morrison. Jake's face went white. Detective Rivera was internal affairs, the department's conscience, the woman who investigated cops when they crossed the line. Mentioning Morrison's name to her would set off a chain reaction that would tear through the department like wildfire. Deputy Williams, I can't. He's been dead for 8 years, and his record is built on cases like Marcus's, Maggie said. How many other witnesses did he ignore? How many other Rebecca Pattersons did he coach into giving the testimony he needed? The truth of it hit Rebecca like a physical blow. He didn't coach me. I told the truth. You told a truth, Maggie corrected. The convenient truth. The one that let you sleep at night while my son rotted in a cell for something he didn't do. Rebecca's composure finally shattered completely. You think this is easy for me? You think I wanted any of this? I was just trying to help catch the person who hurt Mrs. Henderson. The words came out in a rush, desperation and 15 years of buried guilt spilling onto the perfect lawn. But it was too late for explanations, too late for the kind of measured justice that might have saved Marcus Williams. Mrs. Patterson? Tom Bradley called out, his microphone catching every word. Are you saying you have regrets about your testimony? Rebecca spun toward him, her face a mask of fury and terror. I'm saying I was 26 years old and scared, and I did what the police told me to do. I trusted the system. The admission hung in the air like a live grenade. Around them, cameras captured every moment of her breakdown, every tear that carved tracks through her makeup. The woman who had called police to remove an unwanted presence from her neighborhood was now the unwanted presence herself, exposed, vulnerable, stripped of all the privilege that had protected her for 15 years. Maggie watched it all with the detached calm of someone who had finally found the answer to a question that had haunted her for half her adult life. The truth hadn't set anyone free, but it had finally, mercifully, arrived. The cameras rolled relentlessly, their mechanical eyes recording the destruction of 2 lives in real time. Rebecca Patterson stood in the center of her perfect lawn like a woman at her own execution, mascara streaked and trembling, while 15 years of carefully buried truth clawed its way to the surface. Maggie felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, not relief, not satisfaction, but a terrible kind of completion. Like setting down a weight she'd carried so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. Mrs. Chen, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos of reporters' questions. Where is she now? Rebecca's breath came in short, panicked gasps. She moved away years ago, right after the trial, said she couldn't live in a neighborhood where justice didn't matter. Another life disrupted by Detective Morrison's expedient truth. Another person driven away by the machine that had ground up Marcus and kept rolling. Jake stood frozen beside his patrol car, his grandfather's legacy crumbling in real time, the hero worship in his eyes dying with each revelation. Deputy Williams. Another reporter pushed forward, this one from Channel 12. Sources say your son maintained his innocence until his death. What's your response to allegations of prosecutorial misconduct? Prosecutorial misconduct. The words felt too clean, too clinical for what had been done to her family. Marcus hadn't been the victim of misconduct. He'd been fed to a system hungry for easy answers, and Detective Morrison had been more than happy to provide them. Jake. Maggie's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the media circus like a blade. Call Rivera. Now. His hands shook as he reached for his radio. Deputy Williams, once I make this call, there's no going back. Granddad's cases, they'll reopen everything. Good. The word came out harder than she'd intended, but Maggie didn't soften it. How many other Marcus Williamses are buried in his closed cases? How many other families never got their truth? Rebecca was backing toward her house now, her designer sneakers slipping on the perfect grass. I won't be your scapegoat, she said, desperation making her voice shrill. Morrison's dead. The prosecutor's retired. I was just a witness doing my civic duty. Your civic duty was to tell the truth, Maggie replied. Not the truth that was convenient for Detective Morrison's case clearance rate. Jake's finger hovered over his radio, the weight of his decision visible in every line of his young face. The grandson of a legend, about to destroy that legend's reputation, about to admit that everything he'd believed about justice, about his family's honor, about the badge he wore, had been built on lies. Tom Bradley stepped closer, his cameraman tracking his movement. Deputy Williams, what would you say to families of other defendants who might have been wrongfully convicted, based on Detective Morrison's investigations? The question hit her like a physical blow. Other families, other mothers who'd lost their sons to Morrison's manufactured justice, other fathers who might still be alive if the truth had mattered more than case statistics. I'd say, Maggie began, then stopped. Her throat felt raw, scraped clean by 15 years of swallowed screams. I'd say that badge means something, or it's supposed to. Rebecca reached her front door, fumbling with keys that wouldn't stay steady in her shaking hands. This is harassment. I'm calling my lawyer. Call whoever you want, Maggie said. The story's already out there now. Has been for 15 years. We're just finally telling it right. Jake took a shuddering breath and keyed his radio. Control, this is Unit 23. I need Detective Rivera contacted immediately. Tell her we have new evidence regarding Detective Morrison's cases. Multiple cases. The words echoed across the perfect lawn like a death knell. Rebecca's keys fell to her doorstep with a metallic clatter that seemed to ring with finality. You're destroying everything, Rebecca whispered, her back pressed against her door like she could disappear into it. My reputation, my family's name, your own department. No, Maggie said quietly. I'm finally building something real, something Marcus would have been proud of. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every word, every tear, every moment of reckoning that had been 15 years in the making. Soon, this quiet street in Willowbrook Estates would be known across the state. Soon, Detective Morrison's name would be synonymous not with justice, but with its absence. And somewhere in it all, Marcus Williams, who had died alone in a cell, branded as a thief and forgotten by everyone except his mother, would finally get his day in court. Even if that court was the unforgiving tribunal of public opinion, broadcast live from the lawn of the woman whose lies had killed him. The point of no return wasn't a place you could see coming. It was a moment that arrived quietly, dressed as just another decision, just another choice between easy lies and hard truths. Maggie Williams had finally chosen truth. The silence that followed Jake's radio transmission felt like the pause between lightning and thunder, a moment of terrible anticipation before the world changed forever. Maggie watched the young deputy's face cycle through grief, betrayal, and something that might have been relief. The weight of his grandfather's legacy had been crushing him without him even knowing it. Rebecca's keys hit the ground again as she tried to unlock her door, her hands shaking so violently she couldn't manage the simple task. The sound echoed across the perfect lawn like coins on a dead man's eyes. Mrs. Patterson. Detective Rivera's voice crackled through Jake's radio, tinny but unmistakably sharp. We need to talk. The color drained from Rebecca's face. Internal affairs moved fast when they smelled corruption, and Detective Morrison's name carried enough weight to make even a retired legend's cases worth reopening. Unit 23, what's your location? Rivera's voice continued. Willowbrook Estates, 412 Maple Drive, Jake responded, his voice steady despite the devastation in his eyes. We have a situation here. Tom Bradley stepped closer, his microphone catching every word of the radio exchange. Around them, the media circus grew as word spread through police scanners and social media. This wasn't just a story anymore, it was an event, a reckoning broadcast live from suburban America. Rebecca finally managed to get her key in the lock, but she didn't turn it. Instead, she pressed her forehead against the door, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. Mrs. Chen wasn't the only one. The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of implication in all directions. Maggie felt her heart stop, restart, then begin beating with a rhythm that felt like a war drum. What did you say? Rebecca turned around slowly, her back still pressed against the door. Mascara had carved black rivers down her cheeks, and her perfect suburban composure had finally, completely shattered. There was a man, a maintenance worker from the country club. He saw the real thief too, Hispanic guy, early 30s. He tried to tell Detective Morrison, but Morrison said they had enough evidence already. Her voice broke on the last words. He said too many witnesses would just confuse a jury. Jake made it sound like he'd been punched. His grandfather hadn't just ignored inconvenient evidence, he'd actively suppressed it. Multiple witnesses who could have saved Marcus Williams. Silence because their truth didn't fit the narrative Morrison needed. The cameras captured it all. Rebecca's breakdown, Jake's devastation, Maggie's terrible calm as pieces of a 15-year-old puzzle finally clicked into place. The story was writing itself now, each revelation more damning than the last. How many people did you let stay quiet? Maggie asked, her voice deadly soft. How many people saw what really happened and let my son take the blame? I didn't let anyone do anything. Rebecca's composure cracked completely. I was 26 and scared, and I trusted the police to know what they were doing. I trusted the system. The system you trusted killed my son. Each word fell like a hammer blow. It killed my husband. It destroyed my family. And for 15 years, you've known there were other witnesses and you said nothing. Rebecca slid down her door until she was sitting on her doorstep, her head in her hands. I tried to forget. I tried to move on. I thought if I just lived a good life, if I was a good person otherwise. You can't balance those scales, Maggie said. There's no amount of charity work or neighborhood beautification that brings back the dead. A black sedan turned into the subdivision, moving with the purposeful speed of law enforcement. Detective Rivera, coming to collect the pieces of Detective Morrison's shattered legacy. Behind her, more news vans, more cameras, more witnesses to a truth that had been buried for 15 years. Jake straightened his shoulders, some decision settling behind his eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man choosing principle over family loyalty. Mrs. Patterson, when Detective Rivera gets here, you need to tell her everything. About Mrs. Chen, about the maintenance worker, about anyone else who saw what really happened that day. Rebecca looked up at him with something like hope in her eyes. If I cooperate fully, if I help set the record straight, that has to count for something, right? Maggie felt the last of her rage transform into something colder, more final. It might help you sleep at night, but it won't bring back my son. The sedan pulled into the driveway. Detective Rivera stepped out, her expression grim but unsurprised. She'd seen this before, the moment when old lies finally collapsed under the weight of their own contradictions. As Rivera walked across the perfect lawn toward them, Maggie Williams realized that justice wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was simply about truth finally being allowed to exist in the light. Marcus would never come home. David would never wake up. But the lie that had killed them both was finally, mercifully, dying. 6 months later, Maggie Williams stood in the Millbrook County Courthouse lobby, watching sunlight filter through tall windows onto marble floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps seeking justice. The building felt different now, less like a monument to authority and more like what it was supposed to be, a place where truth mattered more than convenience. The Morrison Commission had released its final report that morning. 47 cases under review, 18 wrongful convictions suspected, 5 families already filing civil suits. Detective Morrison's name had been removed from the lobby's memorial wall, his commendations quietly archived in boxes destined for storage. Jake Patterson, he'd gone back to his mother's maiden name, stood beside the information desk in a civilian jacket and jeans. His badge had been returned 2 months ago, not in disgrace but in quiet recognition that some wounds required more than internal affairs could heal. He was studying criminal justice now at the State University, determined to rebuild what his grandfather had broken. Mrs. Williams? His voice still carried that careful respect, though the hero worship was gone. In its place was something more valuable, understanding earned through shared loss. Jake. She nodded, noting how much older he looked. Truth had aged him in ways that time never could. How's Rebecca? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Testified again yesterday. Full cooperation, like her lawyer promised. Mrs. Chen flew back from Oregon to give her statement too. Mrs. Chen, the witness who tried to tell the truth 15 years ago, only to be dismissed as confused and unreliable. She was 73 now, her memory still sharp enough to cut through Detective Morrison's manufactured narrative like a blade. And the maintenance worker? Miguel Santos. He remembered everything. Said he tried 3 times to get someone to listen to him back then. Jake's voice carried the weight of institutional shame. Detective Rivera thinks his testimony alone would have been enough to clear Marcus. Would have been. The cruelest words in the English language, Maggie thought. They couldn't resurrect her son or bring back David or undo 15 years of believing the system worked for people like her. But they could, perhaps, prevent other families from walking the same dark road. Mrs. Williams? A young reporter approached, notebook in hand. Maria Santos from the County Herald, Miguel's daughter as it turned out, now covering the story that had silenced her father years ago. Could I get a statement about today's commission findings? Maggie considered the question. 6 months ago she would have said nothing. Deputy Williams knew how to keep her thoughts private, her rage contained, her grief professional. But the woman standing in this courthouse lobby wasn't quite the same person who'd responded to a call about a suspicious person in Willowbrook Estates. Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, she said finally. Sometimes it's about admitting we got it wrong. The commission did that today. It's more than most families like mine ever get. Maria scribbled notes, then looked up with eyes that reminded Maggie painfully of Marcus at that age. Bright, hopeful, believing the world made sense. Do you think the system can really change? Maggie glanced at Jake, who was studying his shoes with the intensity of a man still learning to carry complicated truths. Ask me in 10 years, she said, when officers like Jake here have had time to rebuild it right. The reporter moved on, chasing other sources, other stories. In the lobby's afternoon quiet, Maggie and Jake stood in the kind of silence that came after storms. Not peaceful exactly, but clean. Swept clear of illusions. I keep thinking about that day, Jake said suddenly. If I'd just listened harder, if I'd asked different questions. You did your job the way you were trained to do it, Maggie replied. The training was wrong. That's not on you. He nodded, but she could see he'd be carrying that weight for years to come. Some burdens couldn't be shared or lifted, only learned to bear with dignity. Through the courthouse windows, Maggie could see Willowbrook Estates in the distance, still perfect, still manicured, but somehow smaller now. Rebecca Patterson had moved away quietly, her house sold to a young black family with children. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who'd followed the story. Mrs. Williams? Jake's voice was careful again. What will you do now? She'd been asking herself the same question for months. 23 years of serving a system that had failed her own family. A badge that meant something different now than it had 6 months ago. Not because the metal had changed, but because she understood its weight better. I'm staying, she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Someone needs to answer the calls. Someone who remembers what it feels like to need help and have the wrong person show up. Outside, the sun was setting over Millbrook County, painting the courthouse lobby in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere in that light, Maggie could almost see them, Marcus with his textbooks and dreams, David with his quiet strength. Not ghosts exactly, but echoes of love that no lie could ever fully silence. Justice wasn't perfect, but today, finally, it was honest. And for Maggie Williams, that would have to be enough.